Hello, baby. Would you be so kind to visit my Patreon and support my art? Hi, sweetie. How was your day? Oh, God. Why don't you come relax with me? I haven't looked National Geographic. I want to read to you. We could learn about animals together. What do you say? What do you say? Okay, get comfortable. Inside animal minds, what they think, feel, and know. Okay, so let's get started on this. Intelligence is the first chapter. Intelligence. Most people think of intelligence as problem-solving, ingenuity, or extraordinary feats of recall. Emotions and feelings, more on those later, are mostly omitted from the equation. So it was with the modern science of animal intelligence, which for much of its history focused on more conventional sorts of smarts. These also have the advantage of being easier to measure. It's hard enough to quantify our own emotions, much less an alligator's. But the time it takes for an elephant to solve a string pulling test or a monkey to recognize a pattern can be parsed down to the millisecond. That was especially important to scientists hoping to push animal intelligence research away from stories and anecdotes. George Ramon's, Charles Darwin's protege, infamously described a monkey extending his bloodied paw to a hunter as an attempt at shaming him. It's not inconceivable, but how could we really know from a story alone? Are monkeys' hands called paws? Because I don't view them that way. Doesn't sound right. With the help of ingenious experimental setups, researchers have now explored the mental abilities of hundreds of species. The results are often astounding. Chimpanzees and some monkeys can best college students on certain math problems. I've never heard best used in that context. Some dolphins use shells to catch fish, and it's not just these well-known creatures that display intelligence, but the whole menagerie. Teeny zebrafish can count to, chickadees look to the future, bees learn from one another, and even crickets weigh decisions. Grizzly bear. At times, scientists chafe at the interpretations of these findings. Does a crow dropping stones in a pitcher of water, as in Aesop's fable, truly understand that displacement will raise its level so that he can drink? Or has he learned through simple trial and error, association, what will happen? We don't know yet for sure. These are important considerations, though, with the proviso that a crow isn't necessarily any less smart for solving a problem through observation and persistence rather than abstract reasoning. That's what I was thinking. Indeed, one lesson of animal intelligence research is to demonstrate that sophisticated abilities can arise from comparatively simple mechanisms. That applies to Homo sapiens too. We might like to think ourselves exceptional in every way, but much of what we do is also quite simple. I also want to point out that I believe humans are far more miserable than all animals and that we don't actually know anything. I think animals are happier than us. There are limits to what can be measured in controlled experimental settings, of course. Certain animals are difficult to study in captivity. Their wild lives may be far richer and more mentally challenging than anything scientists could devise. A grizzly bear, for example, may range over hundreds of square miles, moving between seasonal feeding grounds and demonstrating what clearly looks to be foresight and reasoning. Replicating that in a lab setting is unrealistic, though. For the record, some of their black bear cousins have demonstrated an uncanny ability to recognize pictures, quantities, and categories. As the science of animal intelligence progresses, there's one thing we can all agree on. As much as we've learned, much remains to be discovered. That's Darwin's earthworms. Though remembered as the father of evolutionary theory, Darwin spent much of his adult life thinking about common, humble earthworms. Most people would dismiss their intelligence out of hand. They're so small and they're earthworms. Yet evolutionary theory's great lesson is that people share not only anatomical but also mental characteristics with other animals, and earthworms are animals too. In his final book, The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms, with observations on their habits, Darwin's investigations of possible earthworm intelligence ran for more than 30 pages. Meticulously, he described how they chose and arranged leaf fragments to seal their burrows. Evidence, he thought, of something more than raw instinct at work. You know what? That's part of why I struggled with being a farmer, is because when you dig in the soil, you accidentally chop up earthworms. I don't like that part. It's hard for me to cope with. One alternative alone is left, namely that worms, although standing low on the scale of organization, possess some degree of intelligence, wrote Darwin. This will strike everyone as very improbable, but it may be doubted whether we know enough about the nervous system of the lower animals to justify our natural distrust of such a conclusion. As simple as earthworms might seem, he granted them awareness and intelligence. Sealing a burrow was no small feat. More than that, he implicitly acknowledged their possession of an inner life. Go Darwin. I approve of this message. An earthworm could be aware of his and their hermaphrodites, surroundings, and have a preference for a warm, cozy burrow. It might not seem like much to us, but to an earthworm, it's the world. Opening minds. Arguably, Darwin went too far. Earthworm burrow plugging could indeed be performed without conscious thought. But what's more important is the example he set by treating earthworm intelligence as a hypothesis to be tested. He was in the grandest scientific tradition, open-minded, and I think that is the most important trait one can possess. Personhood and self-awareness. Got elephant here and a bumblebee or a honeybee. Okay. Elephants recognize themselves in a mirror, which is thought to indicate rich self-awareness. Honeybees, according to some scientists, are self-aware. Chimpanzees certainly are. The question of what it means to have a self reads like a riddle, or perhaps a Zen koan. Understanding that you are you is so foundational to human experience that it's difficult, if not downright impossible, to imagine any other state of being. Even those times when we get outside of ourselves, so to speak, are still defined and perceived from within the cockpit of self-awareness. Inextricable as it might be from the human condition, though, animal self-awareness is a thorny question among scientists. From the late 1970s until recently, the gold standard test was mirror self-recognition. If an animal uses a mirror to inspect body parts otherwise hidden from sight, as humans usually do by the time they're children, they're thought to recognize themselves in a mirror and thus are considered self-aware. The mirror test. Other great apes, gorillas, orangutans, chimpanzees, bonobos have passed the test. So have elephants, dolphins, magpies, manta rays, and possibly pigs. While mirror self-recognition is still considered evidence of a highly developed sense of self, one perhaps akin to our own, the test has many critics. Using it as an all-or-nothing arbiter, they say, indulges our habit of treating human-style intelligence as evolution's pinnacle, an exclusive club to which just a few other species might begrudgingly be admitted. Some animals, such as rhesus monkeys and pigeons, failed the test in early experiments, but passed when given enough time to familiarize themselves with mirrors. They don't lack for self, they just don't relate to reflections as readily as we do. perhaps they're not quite so self-absorbed. And even if an animal never passes the test, does that really mean he has no sense of self? In some creatures, such as fish, self-recognition appears to be mediated by chemical rather than a visual cues. For them, scent is perhaps more important than sense than vision, which in a low visibility aquatic world makes perfect sense. Some scientists now argue that self-awareness is a bedrock capacity that all vertebrates and even insects possess. All that's needed is the integration of perception with some mental representation of an individual's place in space. Far from being a sophisticated high-level piece of cognition distinguishing between oneself and everything else is a basic solution to the challenge of navigating life while processing new sensory information with every step or slither. A snapping turtle knows when she's moving. Yes, she does. Cognitive capacities. That doesn't mean a honeybee or garter snake has the same sense of self that we do. Of course, ours is shaped by a particular set of influences. Our cognitive capacities, including powerful long-term memory and an extraordinary capacity for abstraction, our emotional range, and our lifelong steeping in a civilization's worth of stories. But just as you know that you are you, so perhaps does the pigeon on your block, the turtle in a nearby pond, and almost every other creature. Okay, I agree with this. As someone who connects deeply with animals on a spiritual level, I know they've got some serious things going on. It's just, they're just different than us. And thank God for that. Someone out here is being pure. Look at this monkey cake. How are you going to call that a paw? That's a hand. That's a hand. What do you think? Do you agree? Okay, so I think that is enough reading for us tonight. Why don't we get under these covers?